Welcome to Ralph's Flybox. Today we're going to go over an issue that I come across occasionally. It's a question of why to clip the hackle. And if you've watched my my videos, you have probably seen in the past that I do tend to clip a lot of patterns at the bottom, and it's because I want to manipulate how those flies ride in the film. That varies depending on the type of fly that you're dealing with. The traditional hackle dun, or even a thorax dun like this is going to float a little bit higher. It's got a dry fly tail, it's got a poly body, it's got a fully hackled collar, regardless of what the wing post is, and the wing post is slightly further back on the body. So I clip that at the length of the hook gap, and about a 1/3 or a quarter portion on the bottom of the fly. That allows the legs to support a little bit lower, and it keeps the fly almost like a comparadun. It'll ride just a slight bit higher in the front, but the rear of the abdomen and the tail will be in the film. Moving back to the CDC dun, the CDC dun is tied with a very sparse collar. It's only got 2 wraps of dry fly, and it's trimmed again even with the point of the hook. It does have a dry fly body. It's poly and a dry fly tail, but the lighter hackling and the trimming together lets this fly drop completely into the film, and after a few feet of drift is suspended by the tail and the CDC only. The LTD is a true emerger or a cripple pattern. It does fish as a dun very well, but only because the fish recognize it as an emerging dun. It's got a very sparse hackle. It's got a pheasant tail and abdomen, which is meant to sink. When you first drop it on the water, as you'll see here in a little bit, it drops basically like a dry fly. However, within inches of drift, the abdomen and the tail and the bend of the hook will drop below the surface, and the fly is basically suspended by the CDC only. The legs are there as a representation of legs, not to keep it in the film. But that's why different patterns are clipped. These 3 specifically I figured would be a good representation of that. So let's take a look and see how things work out. You see that it falls flat in the film, and the clipped hackle supports the fly very little. It falls flat on the outer portions of the hackle that support it almost like a comparadun does, and that's pretty much how it rides right there. It'll stay dry for slightly longer than the other 2 I'm going to show you, and it'll stay supported by the hackle versus the wing a little bit better than the patterns that I'm going to show you next. But that's the sulfur thorax. The next pattern I'm going to show you is the CDC dun. It's still a dry fly pattern. It's meant to float very similar to the thorax, but the difference is it's a slightly lighter hackled fly, same body and tail as the thorax, but it's a lighter hackle, so it doesn't have as much. Initially, when this lands on the water, it will tend to float almost identical to what you just saw with the dun, the thorax dun. However, with the lighter hackling, this will tend to flatten completely down into the film after a foot or 2 of drift, and it'll be pretty much floated by the CDC. This is the CDC dun. You see this floats very similar, but like I said, once the movement in the water and the breaking of the film during the drift, this will be supported by the CDC and the tail. But again, body's almost completely, the abdomen's almost completely in the film. This will go into the film completely though after a short period. It's meant to do that, It's tied specifically so that it drops down to the CDC for suspension, and that's pretty much what it does very effectively. That's the CDC done. The next pattern is the LTD. The LTD is an emerger pattern. It's a transitional dun where this fishes fairly well as a dun. It fishes very well as a cripple, and it fishes as an emerger extremely effectively. The difference with this pattern is when I first drop it in here, it's going to float very similar to what the first two did. However, the body material is pheasant tail. So in a very short time, you'll notice on the water when you're fishing this, actually fishing it, that the tail and the abdomen and the hook portion, the bend of the hook, is underwater, and it's suspended in the film by a little bit of the hackle's legs, because this is trimmed on the bottom, and the CDC. So we'll show this in two ways. We'll drop it in. Like I said, it's floating right in the film. But this will, and it's doing it already, you see the tail is starting to drop below the film. And if the water was moving, or in a short amount of time, that will submerge. I can see it moving now. There it goes. It's dropping down as the pheasant tail gets wet. And it'll drop all the way down as you're watching right now. It's doing it. There it goes. It'll drop all the way down to just the CDC. The tail portion is completely submerged right now. It's below the film. Now, to show you what it'll do eventually, we're going to wet the abdomen as it would be. And you'll see right now the entire fly is just below the film, and the only thing suspending it is the CDC and a little bit of the hackle that is splayed out. But I'm watching the hackle. I don't know if you can see it from there. I'm watching the hackle right now begin to drop down. Fiber by fiber, I can see it breaking the surface, and it drops down. But the entire hook right now and abdomen is basically below the surface. The abdomen is almost completely. Now, when you have the motion of the water and your drift, it will be down. The only thing you'll see on this pattern as you're drifting it is the CDC. And that's the LTD. Okay, we're back. We've looked at all three patterns dropped in the water. I hope you understand why I do it. Maybe it'll apply to your time on the bench or some of your patterns in water, and you may decide not to clip and not to use it, or decide on other patterns. Everybody's got their preferences. This is just how I tend to tie my patterns, and the reasons for it, and the variations in patterns that are very similar in nature, and how it allows them to fish differently dependent on the body style and the tail material. I hope that that helps you out, and I hope it adds to your time on the water. Thank you very much.